If you're tired of the standard business and marketing fundamentals, frameworks, and funnels, you need a little mischief. Get ready to turn up the volume on the CEO Mischief Maker podcast, where you access conversations with seasoned business owners who have smashed through mindset barriers, innovated the standard boring business and marketing playbooks, and executed future-paced strategies with bleeding-edge tools and tactics to micro-fail their way into massive success and growth. We are Mindset Impact Strategic Catalysts helping innovative entrepreneurs focus. We are CEO Mischief Makers. Ready to make a little mischief? CEO Mischief Makers, I cannot wait to introduce you to this lovely lady, if you're watching me on video, Teresa McCloy. Hey, Teresa, welcome to the conversation.
Great to be here. I've been looking forward to this all day.
Me too. All right, because we've been able to meet a couple of times in person. We've known each other for about a year now, but really your story is very, very impactful. And before we get into talking about all of our wonderful topics together, just start us off with letting everyone know who you are, what you do, all that good stuff.
Sure,
give us a synopsis.
Sure. I'll give you the 2-minute version, right? So as I do work mostly in the coaching or personal development space, I would call it. And recently just authored a book called Do What Matters, Live from Rest, Not Rush. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but I've been in this space since about 2016, both work locally and in person, locally, let me say that again, locally and online. So have clients and business in both spaces, have a certification program for the process that we do, and just really love seeing people just in that transformational work in their development of self and life management and all of those things. So it's a fun ride. I live in Illinois, live on a farm. Those are the details.
Illinois on a farm. Yes. Mm-hmm. I was raised on a ranch way up in Northern California. It was about 27 acres. We had alfalfa, we had chickens, we had cows. I had a pony.
You're my kind of girl.
I'm telling you, it's so awesome. My swimming pool was irrigation ditches. So
there you go. I mean, that's pretty much my life right there. You just described it.
There you go. So, all right, that's working with personal development, and that's a broad topic, but really helping people discover. And I love the whole concept of working from rest, not rush. So, tell me, 2016. What were you doing before 2016 that you started into this coaching role?
Well, again, I'll give you a little bit of a short story. I've always been an entrepreneur at heart. That doing your own thing, running your own business. So I've done everything from the music studio in my home when the kids were little, just to work around that, to a brick and mortar women's clothing store for several years, to ministry as a creative arts minister, doing all the bells and whistles and technic and lights and music and all of that. And then in 2016, with some things that were going on in our life in a family way, as our son was struggling with addiction, I knew I needed to do some things differently as well. So I stepped back to the farm, and was really just sitting in a season of rest, as I would say, of which I'd never done in my whole life, and just taking the pause and saying, okay, what's next? What's the next thing? And, at that season of life, in my late 50s, mid 50s, I really was saying, what are all the life experiences, right, that we can pull together that are taking me to the next thing? And that's really kind of how I moved into there in 2016, saying, I actually had a client I was working as a virtual assistant. And I had a client say to me, you're not a VA, you're really a coach. And that was kind of that light bulb moment that went, oh, is that what I'm doing? And so that's kind of how it all started developing, and then kind of mirrored with my son's story and his behavioral recovery work and my own work I needed to do, that really ended up creating kind of a coaching process, life management rule of life is what we sometimes call it, that I've developed now that I take people through.
So tell me that shift, that mindset, it had to be really a physical shift of doing one thing versus another, but also a mindset shift to go from I'm providing a service for people. I'm a VA, right? So you actually do things for people to I'm a coach. What was that? How was that presented to you besides this, or once this client said this to you, and how did you take that and actually shift yourself to be able to do this next thing?
Well, I do think it's interesting, going back to kind of those few months when I was shifting that mindset, having someone speak something into you sometimes can be the trigger, right? That can be, and I think that's important, to listen to what other people speak into you. And some of it can be positive, some of it can be negative, but that can start the mindset shift. And when you hear two or three people saying the same or similar things, then it's like, oh, that's what someone else sees in me that I maybe don't see in myself. That started the shift for me. And then, like most good entrepreneurial minds would do, right? I started researching and I started getting online and saying, well, what would that look like? How do people make an income doing that? Do people make an income? How would I structure a business? And I started to think about what does this make possible? And I think that's the shift sometimes in our mind is what is possible. And if we'll let ourselves just dream and not stifle the dream and just not try to put it in some magical order, make it all fit into the boxes just yet, we can just hold it for a bit. That's really what some of that rest season offered me. And I think that's a huge part of a benefit of living from rest, not rush, is you're more open to possibilities. Rush means I have to get it done. Rest means what's possible.
Yeah. And that kind of, when a few people maybe identify you in that way, it almost gives you permission, right? It's almost like someone else sees this. So, maybe I do have permission to explore this. Whereas we're so caught up in the doing and the things we have to do for our money and the household and the kids and the husbands and the wives and the, businesses and all those things. We're so caught up in the doing that sometimes we do need permission, or if we look at it that way. I mean, some people, I've been told things in the past, right, where they might say that something, but I'm not in the right place to hear it. So I don't listen and I'm not going to take it as permission. But most of the time it's offered that way. And it really, if we take it as permission to explore what possibilities we can create are just endless.
And I think at that season too, or, if someone's walking through this and needing or looking for that mindset shift, it is also looking at who are you surrounding yourself with? Are you surrounding? And that's a huge part of what I had to discover. And as part of my process is who are you letting into your life and speak into your life? And that particular client was a really positive person in my life. And then I started looking at that thread and kind of following it, right? And that helped the mindset shift continue to grow and open up because I was allowing those people that came from that possibility thinking to speak into me rather than listening sometimes to the negative voices or the people that maybe aren't the right people that you're having speaking. And going forward then in business, that's become my mindset is who am I hanging out with? Who am I allowing to be a voice into my mind, the tape that's playing in my head?
Yeah, definitely. So take us through, I know there was a major mindset shift around your son. This time you're talking about 2016. Other things were starting to happen, or had happened around that time frame. Take us through that a little bit.
Sure. So one of the similarities and patterns that I saw as our son was struggling with heroin addiction and really going in and out of recovery, and it was a very, very difficult time for our family. I saw some similarities in my son's own behaviors and recovery work that I really, was having in my own self around work, and actually was able, to say, wow, I think I'm a workaholic. I think I'm a person who craves and desires work and affirmation. And because I'd had several different occupations, several different careers, and just seemed to be very driven, I would give up things that I would say, and my brain mattered to me for work or for an excuse for work, much like people struggle with other addictive behaviors. And so, unfortunately, our son passed away in 2017, and we lost him to that addictive world. But, one of the gifts that lives on for me from his life on this earth is that shift that he was able to have and help me to see in my own self and in my own behaviors. The gift of learning how someone with an addiction works through recovery and stays in a mindset of recovery, not just sobriety. That's a whole two words that we
Yes.
could pull apart, and I won't go
Yeah.
there, but learning to really live in a different way. And that's what someone who's going to stay in a state of recovery has to do. And so I apply that to my own self, and I say, okay, if I'm going to say that I don't want to live from a workaholic behavioral pattern, what new rhythms, behaviors, and routines do I need to have in my life to help me say yes to the right things, no to the other things, and just create a new modern day rule of life, living from rest, not rush. So that's the gift that I see, how my son's story lives on, how he still blesses me daily and blesses the world, even though it wasn't something he could overcome. And not that he didn't try. Nobody grows up and says, hey, I want to be an addict someday. It's just not a life goal. And I don't say that lightly. It's just the truth. And so that's the gift of even the work that I get to do, is to say, it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be one way or the other. We can live from a different place. So that was the shift that I had to do in 2017 after the loss of our son. And, it's still the work that I'm doing every day personally, but I'm helping others do now. So, yeah.
Wow. And then that whole process, through that development of these tools and this coaching model, and I know you've studied coaching and had certifications and all those things, but through that, and we'll talk about that next. But through that, you develop this process, and it is a very personal thing. And in order for something like this to be that personal, we do have to go through personal difficulties to get there, to bring it into life and make it so meaningful and so purposeful that it's not just a job. It's not just something
No,
we're doing
it's
for
not.
money. Yeah.
And, as I was writing the book in the last couple of years, and I always say about the book, the first 3 chapters of the book are my story. Now, it's not going to be your story. It's not going to be anyone listening to the podcast story. It's my story. But it's valuable in the context then of the rest of the book and the chapters that take you through the application, the applicable part about, gosh, I'd like to know how to do some of these things too, so I can apply them into my own life. But I think story is important. And I think when we're willing to be that vulnerable, so that's part of the mindset shift for me too, that was huge in that time and space. I live in a very small community. So, and at that point was working as pastor. So small community as a pastor, and our son is an addict. His name is in the paper. He's getting arrested. He's having felonies. I had to realize that, I couldn't put on this false facade. This is my real life. This is what's happening to me. And yet the doors of opportunity that opened up for other people to say, my kid too, my husband, my wife, my family member, we struggle with the same things. That was one of the big mindset shifts for me, and lessons that I learned was, tell your story. Don't be ashamed of where you've been or who you are or the transformation. You and I both just had the opportunity to speak an event together, and we both got to share just a little bit of our story. And when we do that, it's just a human connection that comes between people that doesn't feel like, oh, you just want a transactional relationship with me anymore. Now we have a human connection. And I think that's one of the big shifts that I had to see was, Life isn't about transactional relationships. It's about deep interweaving of story and relationships. So that was a huge shift.
Okay, hold on. If your mindset was shifted, you were inspired to innovate, and you were spurred into action, don't just move on with your day. Focus, my friend, and take a few minutes to visit CEOmischiefmaker.com to learn more about the value that was shared with you today. Please act now and create some CEO mischief of your own.